The neighborhood had once been quiet in a simple, comfortable way. It was the kind of place where people waved while walking dogs and left packages on porches without worry. Lawns were cut on weekends, kids rode bikes in the evenings, and most neighbors minded their own business. The Homeowners Association had existed for years, but it mostly stayed in the background. Its rules were basic, and most people followed them, without thinking much about it. That calm began to fade when one board member started taking her role far too seriously. She had moved into the neighborhood a few years earlier and quickly volunteered for the HOA board. At first, she seemed organized and eager to help. She talked a lot about standards and property values. Some people appreciated her energy. Others felt uneasy, but stayed quiet. Over time, her tone changed. What started as reminders slowly turned into warnings. Friendly notes became official letters. One homeowner, who had lived there longer than most, felt the shift more than anyone else. He kept his house clean and his yard neat. He paid his dues on time and rarely attended meetings because there never seemed to be a reason to. He believed that if you followed the rules, you were left alone. He was wrong. It started with something small. One morning, he found a bright notice taped to his door. It said his trash bins were visible from the street for too long after pickup. The letter quoted a rule he had never noticed before. He shrugged it off and moved the bins earlier the next week. Then came another notice. This time, it was about the color of a small outdoor chair on his porch. The letter said the shade did not match approved tones. He felt confused. Several neighbors had similar furniture, but none of them seemed bothered. Still, he replaced the chair to avoid trouble. A few weeks later, a fine appeared in his mailbox. It claimed he had failed to correct an issue that had never been mentioned before. When he emailed the HOA for details, the response was short and cold. It came from the same board member every time. Her words were formal, but the message was clear: comply or pay. Neighbors began to notice her walking around with a clipboard, stopping to take photos. She would stand at the edge of driveways, writing things down. Some people joked about it. Others felt uncomfortable, but no one wanted to challenge her. HOA rules had a way of making people nervous. Even when they were in the right, the homeowner tried to speak during a monthly meeting. He calmly asked why he was receiving more notices than others. The board member smiled in a tight way and said rules applied to everyone equally. She spoke like a teacher correcting a child. The rest of the board stayed quiet, avoiding eye contact. After that meeting, the letters increased. There were warnings about landscaping, about a small crack in the driveway, about a package left on the porch overnight. Each notice carried a tone of authority, as if she was watching his every move. It felt personal now. He started to feel uneasy in his own home, checking outside before leaving for work, wondering what might be wrong today. The stress crept into his daily life. He slept poorly and felt tense when opening mail. Friends told him to ignore it, but fines kept adding up. He paid them because fighting felt exhausting. The board member seemed to enjoy having control. She used it often. Things crossed a line one afternoon when he came home early and noticed someone in his yard. She was standing near his side fence, taking photos on her phone. She claimed she was documenting a violation related to yard maintenance. He reminded her that it was private property. She dismissed him and said the HOA had the right to inspect. That moment stayed with him. It no longer felt like rule enforcement. It felt like harassment. He began keeping records. Every letter, every email, every fine went into a folder. He noted dates and times. He spoke quietly with neighbors and learned he was not alone. Others had similar stories, but none as constant as his. Most were afraid to push back. The board member had a reputation now. People avoided her. What she did not know was that the homeowner had raised his family with strong values about fairness and the law. His adult son, who lived in another state, worked in federal service. The homeowner rarely talked about it and never used it to impress anyone. To him, it was simply his child's job. Nothing more. When the homeowner mentioned the situation during a phone call, the son listened carefully. He did not get angry. He did not suggest confrontation. He simply told his father to keep documenting everything and to stay calm. Rules apply to everyone, he said. That includes people who think they're above them. The homeowner didn't want trouble. He wanted peace. He wanted to enjoy his home again without fear of opening his mailbox. Still, a quiet resolve began to grow. He realized that staying silent had only made things worse. The board member, meanwhile, grew bolder. She sent a notice threatening legal action if continued noncompliance occurred. The wording was vague, but the intent was clear. She wanted obedience, not cooperation. Neighbors started to whisper. Some felt sorry for him. Others worried they might be next. The HOA that once existed to keep things orderly had become a source of tension and fear. Part 1. Ends with the homeowner standing in his kitchen, holding another letter, feeling tired but no longer helpless. For the first time, he wasn't just reacting. He was preparing. He didn't know exactly how things would unfold, but he knew one thing for sure. The situation had gone too far, and the truth would not stay buried forever if you want. I can now write part 2 in the same tone and length. Continuing smoothly from this point, the tension in the neighborhood kept growing. The homeowner tried his best to ignore the board member's constant monitoring, but it was impossible. Each day seemed to bring a new letter, a new warning, or another fine. Even small things that had never been an issue suddenly became problems. The grass had grown slightly longer than usual. A branch leaned too close to the fence. The mailbox had a tiny scratch. Each time, the board member made sure it was noticed, recorded, and documented. It was as if she was hunting for reasons to keep him on edge. He talked to neighbors quietly, often in passing or on the phone. Some shared similar experiences, though none were as targeted as he was. They mentioned vague warnings, but most chose not to fight. A few whispered about paying the fines just to avoid more trouble. Some tried speaking up at meetings and quickly learned it wasn't safe. The board member had a way of turning the room against anyone who questioned her. People were afraid of her influence. Still, these conversations gave him comfort. He wasn't alone, even if it often felt that way. The homeowner began noticing the psychological effect on himself. He would hesitate before stepping out into his own yard, checking over his shoulder, wondering if she was watching. Even in his home, he felt a sense of unease, as though the letters, fines, and warnings had followed him inside. He kept a small journal to record each encounter and every notice, even those he felt were petty. Writing it down helped him feel a little in control. He started taking photos of his property, just in case the board member tried to claim a violation existed that didn't. One evening, he received a phone call from the board member. Her tone was calm, but carried an edge. She spoke of ongoing violations and hinted at legal steps if he didn't comply immediately. She did not give specifics, only a general sense of authority meant to intimidate. The homeowner stayed calm, politely asking her to provide written documentation for each claim. She paused, then said she would review it, and hung up. The call left him uneasy, but also determined. He realized that any sign of fear would only encourage her. Maintaining composure became a small act of resistance. The next week, she escalated further. She began appearing at the neighborhood entrances, speaking to neighbors, asking questions about him and his property. Some neighbors tried to be polite, offering small answers, but it was clear she wanted more. He noticed that she sometimes timed her visits when he was outside, taking photos or making notes. Her presence created a sense of surveillance. He felt trapped in his own home. What once had been peaceful now felt oppressive. His adult son visited around this time. They hadn't discussed the situation in detail yet, but he had sensed the stress his father carried. They spent quiet evenings talking about everyday life first, keeping the conversation normal. He didn't want his father to feel judged or helpless. After a few days, the homeowner shared the letters, emails, and the ongoing harassment. The son listened closely, taking in every detail without showing anger. He asked questions calmly, clarifying dates, times, and the exact nature of each fine and notice. He pointed out that while the board member had authority over certain rules, she had no right to harass, intimidate, or single out one person unfairly. Everything needed to be documented carefully. Together, they reviewed the documents and photos. The homeowner had been diligent in keeping records. but the son suggested adding more details. Every interaction, even casual remarks or neighborhood gossip related to him, could matter if this escalated further. The son explained how legal processes worked without needing to involve threats or anger. It wasn't about using his job to scare anyone. It was about following the law and protecting rights. The homeowner began to feel a quiet sense of hope. He was no longer facing the situation alone. Meanwhile, the board member continued her tactics. She sent more letters, sometimes listing multiple violations in a single notice. She began attending community events and subtly making comments that could be seen as criticisms of him. The homeowner noticed that some neighbors now avoided him, unsure whether to interact. Some were afraid of attracting the board member's attention themselves. It was isolating. Yet, the more isolated he felt, the more determined he became to handle things properly. He knew reacting emotionally could be used against him. The tension reached another level when the board member tried to enter the property without permission, claiming it was part of an inspection. The homeowner politely refused, citing privacy rules and state law. She argued, but he stayed firm. This moment was pivotal. She realized she could not automatically intimidate him into compliance. At the same time, he realized that being passive had only allowed her power to grow. Boundaries had to be set. Respect for privacy and property could not be negotiated away, no matter her authority on paper. The homeowner's neighbors began to notice the stand he was taking. Quiet conversations in driveways and across fences revealed growing awareness. People admired his calm persistence. Some began documenting minor issues of their own, realizing that rules could be misused if left unchecked. The sense of shared concern spread slowly, giving the homeowner a subtle boost in morale. He was no longer completely isolated. He understood that the board member's power came from secrecy and fear. Once the community could see that, her influence weakened. During a family dinner, the son explained the importance of approaching the situation strategically. They would continue documenting everything and maintain a calm, respectful tone in all correspondence. Emotional outbursts could be twisted into evidence against him. By remaining factual and methodical, they could build a strong case. The homeowner listened carefully, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. For the first time in months, he sensed a path forward. It wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness and restoring peace. Despite this, the board member was relentless. She sent notices accusing him of minor rule breaches that seemed almost impossible to comply with fully. Sometimes, she cited rules that were vague or outdated. Each letter carried a tone of authority designed to intimidate. Yet, he responded carefully and factually, noting each claim and providing evidence where possible. He learned to never ignore any correspondence, no matter how petty it seemed. Ignoring her only allowed her power to feel larger than it was. One afternoon, he received another call. This time, the board member spoke as if she were testing him. She asked questions about landscaping changes, paint colors, and timing of trash pickup. He calmly answered, providing facts and timelines. She paused, sounding frustrated, then ended the call. He realized she did not expect a measured, confident response. She had counted on fear and defensiveness. By remaining calm, he had taken away her control over the interaction. As weeks passed, the pattern continued. He never retaliated or used his son's position to intimidate. Instead, he focused on facts, documentation, and his own calm demeanor. The small victories built confidence. He learned to speak politely, but firmly whenever she approached, ensuring all interactions were witnessed or recorded. His perspective shifted. This wasn't just about property or rules. It was about asserting rights, respectfully, and refusing to be bullied. Neighbors gradually began to speak up more. Quiet observations about unfair treatment started circulating. People who had stayed silent now felt empowered to share their experiences. Realizing the board member's behavior affected multiple households, the sense of community slowly returned, even if tension still existed. The homeowner's perseverance had become an example without him intending it. He had not sought recognition. He simply wanted his home and peace back. Yet others noticed and quietly supported him. The story of part 2 closes with the homeowner reflecting on the change in himself. The fear and helplessness that once dominated his days had transformed into cautious confidence. He realized that patience, careful documentation, and calm persistence were stronger than intimidation. The board member's tactics had begun to lose power, but the journey was far from over. He knew that the next steps would require continued focus and careful action. Still, for the first time in months, he could breathe a little easier, knowing he was no longer completely alone and that fairness might prevail after all. The days after his son's visit felt lighter. Though the tension in the neighborhood remained, the homeowner had learned to approach each interaction with the board member carefully. Letters were read slowly, documented, and stored. Every email was printed and dated. Every minor conversation was noted in his journal. What once felt overwhelming was now a task, a routine that helped him feel in control. His son had emphasized that careful preparation and calm persistence were stronger than anger or fear. The homeowner believed him, and each day he practiced it. The board member, unaware of the quiet strategy forming against her, continued her usual rounds. She attended neighborhood events with a clipboard in hand, spoke loudly about rules and compliance, and subtly commented about responsible homeowners. Her eyes often lingered on him, scanning for any sign of imperfection. He met her gaze calmly, pretending not to notice. It was exhausting, but he understood that she thrived on making him anxious. By staying composed, he took away her favorite tool, fear. Meanwhile, he and his son began to organize the growing pile of documents. There were letters, threatening fines, photographs of minor issues, recorded phone calls, and meeting minutes. Each item told a story of persistence and abuse of authority. The son suggested creating a timeline, showing exactly when the board member's actions crossed the line from normal HOA enforcement to harassment. They labeled each document carefully, noting dates, times, and details. It was methodical work, but empowering. For the first time, the homeowner felt he had a clear path forward, even if the board member remained unaware of the growing opposition. They also reviewed state laws regarding homeowners associations and property rights. The son explained things in a way that made sense without scaring his father. He pointed out that while HOAs had authority over certain rules, they could not harass, intimidate, or single out an individual unfairly. Every unwarranted fine, every private intrusion, every attempt to manipulate neighbors could be challenged. The son emphasized that the process should remain legal, professional, and unemotional. The truth is stronger than intimidation, he said, and once you show it, no one can argue with it. The homeowner began reaching out to neighbors more deliberately. He discovered that others had quietly experienced similar treatment. Some had received letters about minor landscaping details. Others had been subtly criticized at community events. Many had chosen to stay silent, fearing confrontation. The homeowner spoke calmly, sharing his documentation and encouraging them to record their own experiences. They didn't need to act immediately, but they needed a record. Slowly, a small network of homeowners formed, sharing advice and support. It was quiet at first, but each conversation chipped away at the board member's perceived control. As the board member escalated her behavior, the homeowner remained patient. One afternoon, she sent a letter claiming that a minor crack in the driveway was a violation requiring immediate repair. The homeowner carefully responded, attaching photographs taken over several months showing that the crack was minor, it's natural, and had been reported previously. He kept the tone polite and factual, making no accusations, simply stating the truth. The son reviewed the response, nodding in approval. Exactly, he said. Facts, calm, and documentation. Never give her the drama she wants. A few weeks later, the board member attempted another form of pressure. She questioned neighbors about the homeowner's property during casual conversations, trying to create doubt or friction. Some neighbors, cautious, said little. Others, who had witnessed her tactics before, gently declined to comment. The homeowner noticed these interactions from his window, felt a growing sense of solidarity among those who had observed her behavior. People were starting to see a pattern, and the isolation that had once allowed her to act unchecked began to weaken. The homeowner's patience and preparation began to yield small victories. Minor fines were contested with evidence, letters were clarified or rescinded, and the board member appeared frustrated when her usual intimidation tactics did not work. She tried to maintain authority, but her confidence seemed shakier each time he responded calmly with facts. Neighbors started asking quiet questions about his documentation and the laws he had learned. He shared only general advice, emphasizing record-keeping and calm communication. Many found it reassuring that someone was standing up methodically without creating drama. One afternoon, the homeowner received a phone call from the board member. Her tone was sharper than usual, and she implied that legal steps might follow if he continued to question her letters. The homeowner remained calm, asking for written clarification and politely noting that he was documenting the conversation. She ended the call abruptly, clearly unsettled. For the first time, he realized that her authority was not absolute. Confidence, preparation, and calm could counter her usual tactics. The invisible power she had relied on for months was beginning to fade. The son suggested taking another step, submitting formal complaints to the appropriate oversight organizations. They would outline the repeated harassment, the abuse of authority, and the unnecessary fines. They also included the documentation showing that other homeowners had similar experiences. The son emphasized the importance of remaining factual and respectful, avoiding personal attacks. "We are not fighting her personally," he said. "We are simply showing the truth and making sure the rules are followed properly." As the complaint process moved forward, the homeowner noticed a subtle change in the board member's behavior. She seemed less confident at neighborhood meetings, spoke less frequently, and avoided looking directly at him. Other board members began to show hesitation as well. It was clear that the pattern of her intimidation was recognized, and the risk of scrutiny made them cautious. The homeowner did not celebrate. He stayed focused on the process, continuing to document and respond calmly. Small victories mattered, but the larger issue remained unresolved until the official process concluded. During this time, the homeowner reflected on the lessons he had learned. Fear and frustration had been natural at first, but they were not useful tools. Patience, preparation, and calm persistence allowed him to maintain control over his own life and property. His relationship with neighbors strengthened through quiet support and shared experience. His son's guidance had been invaluable, providing clarity without pressure. The homeowner realized that standing up for oneself was not about confrontation, but about knowledge, composure, and persistence. Neighbors slowly began to speak more openly about the board members' behavior. Quiet conversations at fences or in driveways revealed shared experiences. Some admitted they had felt intimidated but had not realized it could be addressed. The homeowner encouraged them to keep records, and if they felt comfortable, submit accounts to support formal complaints. The sense of solidarity was growing. The board members' behavior, which once seemed unchallenged, now faced scrutiny from multiple directions. The homeowner continued to receive letters, but he no longer felt the panic that had dominated his early days. He responded calmly, attached evidence, and kept copies of all correspondence. The board members' threats carried less weight, as everyone involved knew that transparency and documentation were key. Meetings, once a source of anxiety, became opportunities to observe, document, and maintain composure. Each day reinforced the principle that authority without accountability could be challenged. But it required patience and careful strategy. As Part 3 ends, the homeowner understood the situation in a new way. The challenge was not about fighting the board member personally, but about creating an environment where fairness and truth prevailed. The small victories he had achieved gave him hope. The process was slow, but methodical. His son's guidance had shown him that patience, preparation, and calm persistence were stronger than fear or intimidation. The homeowner felt more empowered than he had in months, ready to continue the careful work needed to restore balance in his community. After months of careful documentation and calm responses, the homeowner noticed a change in the board member's behavior. It was subtle at first, a hesitation when she spoke at meetings, a pause when she approached neighbors, a glance that seemed less confident. She was used to controlling the narrative intimidating him with letters and threats, and having neighbors quietly support her by fear. But now, the pattern of her behavior had been exposed in small ways, and she could sense it. Her usual authority felt unstable. The homeowner continued his routine. He responded to every letter and noticed calmly and professionally, attaching photographs and dates whenever relevant. He kept detailed notes on every interaction, even minor comments made by the board member in passing. He spoke politely with neighbors, encouraging them to do the same. Slowly, word spread that he was not reacting emotionally, not arguing, but simply following the rules and documenting everything. Neighbors who had felt trapped in silence began quietly sharing their own experiences. Realizing that the rules were being applied unfairly and selectively, the board member, meanwhile, began to overcompensate. She sent letters faster, sometimes multiple in 1 week, hoping to intimidate him into a mistake. Some notices referenced obscure rules that had never been enforced consistently. Others contained deadlines that seemed impossible to meet. She even tried showing up unannounced during daytime hours, ostensibly to inspect minor issues. Each action, however, was carefully countered by the homeowner. He politely reminded her of property rights and HOA boundaries, and always documented the encounters. His calm, factual approach was making her lose control, and she could feel it. The homeowner's son suggested they escalate the approach in a legal but non-confrontational way. They submitted formal complaints to the HOA's oversight committee and, when appropriate, to the state agency overseeing community associations. The complaints detailed the repeated harassment, the selective application of rules, and the emotional stress caused by the board members' actions. Each claim was supported with photos, dates, and correspondence. The son emphasized that the complaints were not personal attacks. They simply documented a consistent pattern of misuse of authority. As soon as the complaints were submitted, the board member's behavior grew more erratic. At community meetings, she tried to assert dominance but faltered when others asked questions. Neighbors began speaking up in subtle ways, describing their own minor grievances and inconsistencies they had noticed. The board member's usual confidence wavered, replaced by visible irritation and unease. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. The homeowner remained composed throughout. He attended meetings with a notebook, noting each comment and interaction. He continued responding to letters factually, never emotionally. Each careful action weakened the board member's influence and made her attempts to intimidate less effective. Neighbors who had once stayed silent were slowly emboldened, often nodding in agreement or quietly confirming what he said. The board member's panic became more apparent. When she tried to rally support from other board members, some of them, who had once followed her lead without question, started to hesitate. They saw the documentation, noticed the complaints submitted to oversight authorities, and realized the risk of being associated with unfair actions. Her usual tactics of isolating and intimidating individuals were losing their effect. She was no longer in control of the narrative. At home, the homeowner reflected on the changes. The fear and helplessness that had dominated him in earlier months had shifted into a steady confidence. He realized that the board member's power had never been absolute, had been built on fear and silence. By staying calm, documenting thoroughly, and acting methodically, he had taken away the leverage she relied on. His son reminded him that patience was still essential. The process might take time. But the truth was undeniable. The board member's next attempts to regain control were even more desperate. She sent letters with harsher language, claiming that repeated minor violations could result in legal action. She attempted to corner neighbors into providing statements against him. She even suggested that minor misunderstandings could escalate into fines or legal proceedings. But each move was met with documentation, calm responses, and quiet community support. Her frustration was evident. Every attempt to intimidate was now countered by evidence and careful preparation. Neighbors became an unexpected source of strength. Those who had quietly observed the situation began sharing minor details. They had witnessed instances of selective enforcement, letters they had received, or her attempts to intimidate in public spaces. They didn't need to confront her directly. but their quiet support added credibility to the homeowner's documentation. The board member, once confident that she could manipulate the situation, now found that her tactics were visible to everyone. The homeowner's son also helped him strategize communication. They avoided any personal attacks or emotional responses, focusing only on facts, evidence, and law. This approach minimized the board member's ability to twist words or manipulate situations. Each letter, each interaction became a demonstration that authority must be exercised fairly and legally. By staying calm and factual, the homeowner maintained moral and practical high ground. While the board member's behavior appeared increasingly unreasonable, eventually, the HOA Oversight Committee requested a formal meeting with both the board member and the homeowner. During this meeting, the documentation submitted by the homeowner clearly showed the repeated selective enforcement, necessary fines, and attempts to intimidate him. The committee asked questions, reviewed evidence, and listened carefully. The board member, who had been used to controlling the room, struggled to respond effectively. Her usual confidence was replaced by hesitation and defensiveness. The homeowner remained composed, answering questions factually and calmly. His consistent preparation had built a clear, undeniable case. Word in the neighborhood began to shift. Other homeowners, once silent or fearful, noticed the change in the board member's demeanor. They saw that fair process and calm persistence could counter intimidation. Some began quietly documenting their own experiences, realizing that collective attention made it more difficult for unfair actions to continue. The board member's isolation increased as her influence weakened. Her attempts to manipulate others or rally support within the board were met with polite caution or silence. The homeowner reflected on the journey. Months of fear, frustration, and tension had gradually been replaced with patience, confidence, and control. He realized that the real power came not from fear or threats, but from methodical preparation, gall, persistence, and factual communication. The board member had underestimated him and his community. She had relied on fear and isolation, but both had been countered by transparency, patience, and quiet support. By the end of Part 4, the board member's panic was evident to all who observed her. She no longer moved with confidence, spoke cautiously, and avoided direct confrontation. Neighbors who had previously stayed silent were quietly observing, many feeling empowered by the homeowner's methodical and composed approach. The homeowner had not sought revenge or confrontation. He had focused on fairness, evidence, and law. And in doing so, he had quietly but effectively demonstrated that authority without accountability could not succeed. The situation had not yet fully resolved, but the momentum had shifted. What had once been fear and helplessness had turned into clarity, confidence, and preparation. The homeowner's journey illustrated that patience, persistence, and truth were stronger than intimidation. The next step would bring resolution, and the homeowner felt ready, knowing that the foundation he had built with careful documentation, calm composure, and community support could not be undone. The homeowner woke up that morning with a quiet sense of resolve. The months of letters, fines, and intimidation were finally reaching a point where change seemed possible. The constant tension that had hung over his house and his daily routine had, in small ways, started to lift. The board member had been panicking for weeks, her confidence visibly shaken. Neighbors were watching, some quietly supporting him, others observing cautiously. The momentum was shifting, and he knew it. The HOA Oversight Committee had scheduled a final review. It would be a formal meeting with both the board member and the homeowner present. He prepared carefully, gathering all the documentation he had kept over the months. Letters, emails, photos, meeting notes, and a detailed timeline of events were all neatly organized. Every interaction, every violation she had claimed, and every instance of intimidation was clearly documented. He felt confident because the evidence was factual, irrefutable, and impartial. There was nothing emotional or exaggerated, nothing that could be dismissed as hearsay. When he arrived at the meeting, he saw the board member waiting. She looked tense, her usual confident expression replaced by a nervous composure. Other board members were present, some avoiding eye contact, some fidgeting with papers. The homeowner noticed subtle shifts in their behavior, hesitation when speaking, careful wording, and polite acknowledgement of points he made. The balance of authority in the room had clearly shifted. The meeting began with the oversight committee reviewing the homeowner's documentation. He presented the timeline, letters, and photos systematically. He spoke calmly, answering questions factually and with patience. Every point he made was supported by evidence. The board member struggled to respond. She tried to argue minor technicalities. But the committee referred to the documentation, asking specific questions about dates, times, and consistency. She faltered under the scrutiny. Her repeated attempts to intimidate or assert dominance were no longer effective. The facts spoke louder than threats. The committee then allowed other neighbors to provide input. Quietly, one by one, they described minor experiences with selective enforcement, unnecessary fines, or small attempts at intimidation. None were dramatic on their own, but collectively, they painted a clear picture of a pattern of behavior. The board members' influence, built over months of fear and silence, crumbled under transparency and collective attention. She had relied on isolation and intimidation. And now, those tools were gone. Throughout the process, the homeowner remained composed. He did not raise his voice or argue unnecessarily. He did not accuse or insult. He simply presented the facts, answered questions politely, and maintained a calm presence. His demeanor contrasted sharply with the board members' nervous energy. The committee observed carefully, noting the difference between clear, factual reporting and defensive, erratic behavior. After hours of discussion, the committee concluded their review. They recognized the homeowner's documentation and persistence as thorough and professional. They acknowledged that the board members' actions had crossed the line from rule enforcement into harassment. Recommendations were made. The board member would be removed from her leadership position. Any fine she had issued without proper justification would be rescinded, and clearer guidelines would be established to prevent similar situations in the future. The homeowner listened quietly, relief washing over him. Months of tension, uncertainty, and stress were finally coming to an end. As he left the meeting, he noticed neighbors standing outside. Some offered quiet congratulations, smiles of support, or nods of acknowledgement. The community, which had once felt divided and fearful, was slowly beginning to rebuild trust and communication. The homeowner realized that his calm persistence, careful documentation, and measured responses had not only protected him, but had also helped restore fairness for others. His focus on truth and patience had created a ripple effect throughout the neighborhood. At home, he reflected on the journey. Fear and frustration had dominated the early months. He had felt trapped, powerless, and constantly on edge. Letters and fines had seemed overwhelming, and the board member's confidence had made her appear untouchable. But with support from his son, careful documentation, a commitment to calm and factual responses, he had gradually turned the situation around. He had regained control without escalating conflict or creating drama. The homeowner's son visited again shortly after the resolution. They spent time reviewing the process and reflecting on what had happened. His son praised his patience, methodical approach, and composure. "You handled this the right way," he said. "You didn't fight with anger. You didn't create unnecessary conflict. You showed the truth calmly, and the system worked." The homeowner felt a sense of pride, not from victory over someone else, but from knowing he had acted with integrity and patience. The board member, meanwhile, adjusted to her new role, or rather, her lack of it. Her removal from leadership was a clear consequence of her actions. Other neighbors who had witnessed her behavior quietly acknowledged the shift. The power she had relied upon for months was gone. Attempts to intimidate or manipulate would no longer hold sway, and the community slowly regained its balance. In the days that followed, life returned to a calmer pace. Letters stopped arriving with threats or fines. The homeowner could walk through his yard without looking over his shoulder. Small annoyances still occurred, as they always would in any community, but there was a sense of order and fairness restored. Neighbors began engaging more openly, sharing concerns and solutions without fear. Transparency and accountability replaced secrecy and intimidation. The homeowner reflected on the lessons learned. He realized that fear could be powerful but temporary, while calm, persistence, and documentation created lasting protection. He understood that standing up for oneself did not require aggression or retaliation. It required knowledge, patience, and composure. He had turned months of stress into a learning experience, gaining confidence in himself and in the principles of fairness and accountability. Neighbors, too, were quietly transformed. Some had learned the value of documentation, patience, and factual reporting. Others had seen that authority must be held accountable. The quiet support they had offered became a foundation for a more transparent and fair community. What had once seemed like an oppressive environment slowly shifted into a place where rules were enforced fairly, and intimidation was no longer effective. The homeowner's life regained normalcy. He spent more time outdoors without worry, spoke with neighbors freely, and enjoyed his home again. His relationship with his son strengthened. As they had navigated a challenging situation together with integrity and patience, he no longer felt powerless. He had learned that fairness, composure, methodical action could overcome intimidation and restore balance. Looking back, he saw how the months of stress had shaped him. What had once seemed overwhelming became manageable with preparation and calm persistence. He understood that real strength was not in anger or revenge, but in quiet determination and truth. The board members' lesson, though difficult to endure, had ultimately reinforced the value of patience, integrity, and community support.